And we begin the program with Virginia Senator Mark Warner. Senator, it's appropriate to have you here, 4th of July weekend. Your state, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, James Madison, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Al.
Let's turn to health care. President Obama brought the battle for health care to your state. One of the big fights, not the only one, maybe not even the biggest, but one of the big fights is over the so-called public option. There's sort of four possibilities. One is a full-fledged Medicare, the other is a fallback, robust plan that if things don't work with the private sector, and then the co-ops, national or state and regional. Which of those four has the most appeal to you right now, if any?
Well, I think what we ought to back up and look at is how do we get competition? I think I don't support a single payer. I think we need a private run system. I actually am intrigued with the co-op idea, which would say, how do we go into those communities where there may simply be a single insurance provider and provide some kind of competition?
National co-op?
Well, I would be open to either national or a state version. But at the end of the day, what we ought to be having is a competitive-based system.
The House last week, as you know, passed a controversial climate change bill. Your fellow Virginia Democrat, Rick Boucher, called it a, quote, carefully balanced measure that enables coal usage to grow as electricity demand increases. Do you agree, and would you support something along the lines of the House bill?
Well, listen, I think Rick Boucher did great work on the House bill. I think there's going to be more work to be done in the Senate. I want to get to a bill that I can vote for because I think this is...
You could vote for the House.
Listen, I think there are ways that we can improve on the House bill, and I think that's what the Senate will do. I want to make sure we've got an ability to take on the question of climate change, but in an area that also doesn't disproportionately hurt the Midwest or the South. I want to make sure as well that we keep American business competitive in this.
Give me one or two.
Let me say that the reasoning here is not only around climate, but the fact that we're still spending $600 billion buying oil from countries that don't like us, and I think, as a former telecom guy, that the next 25 years is going to actually, job creation and wealth creation around energy will top what happened in telecom and IT over the last 25 years. So America needs to be in the lead in this space.
Can you give me one or two specific?
Well, let me give you a couple of areas. I think we've got to make sure that there is a transition period for manufacturing, so that we don't, in particularly competitive areas like paper manufacturing and other areas, that we don't put such an immediate burden on that we simply move some of these jobs offshore into countries that are not participating in this new climate regime. So I want to look at the appropriate transition periods, but I want us to get to a bill that where I can vote yes, where I hope we can get a large majority of the Senate.
You're right. You are a pretty good political prognosticator. You've got a pretty good political track record. What are the odds that the Senate this year will pass a health care reform bill first, and then secondly, a climate change bill?
I would put the odds on both of those way north of 50–60%.
You would?
Yeah, I think that we've got to take on health care from a defensive standpoint to actually address not only health care coverage, but to get our federal deficit under control. And I think the energy bill we've got to take on, as I mentioned earlier, from an offensive standpoint, because where are the jobs and where's the wealth going to be created over the next 25 years? It's going to be how we get the new energy regime right. And right now, America's not in the lead. Unfortunately, Europe's in the lead. And we've got to take that leadership position back. One
of your concerns has been chronic long-term deficits. You've advocated an entitlements commission to deal with that. The other day, a leading Wall Street fellow and Democrat, Roger Altman, said over the long run, in addition to what you've talked about, you were going to have to think about moving to a value-added tax. Would you put that on the table?
Listen, I think before you start talking about new revenues, you've got to show that you can limit federal spending. And a big piece of that, again, is going to be health care. A big piece of that is going to be about entitlements. I strongly believe that while I'm only a new senator 6 months in, I'm not sure the current process will ever give us the will to take on the entitlement reform in a major way. So I believe a bipartisan commission that would take on entitlement reform, that would then you'd have a straight up and down vote similar to the BRAC process, is the only way you're going to get the kind of resolution around spending that we need.
Okay, that's entitlements. Should a value-added tax be considered as you look at these long-run chronic deficits?
If we can show that we can actually tighten our belt on spending, I think the question of looking at additional revenue sources, if there's a gap, that can be discussed at that point. But the first step has to be how do you
what I'm trying to figure is, you go to the taxes, is that an area where you want to think about?
Listen, I was in 2004 in my home state of Virginia. We tightened spending. We still had a revenue shortfall. I had a 2-to-1 Republican legislature. We put a tax reform bill in place that raised revenues, but we did it in the process where we slowed spending spending first.
Senator, you have proposed a committee or council for a systemic risk regulator rather than the Fed. How would that have worked? Let's go back to September 14th. How would it have been better and different?
Well, hopefully the council, which would include the chairman of the Fed, the Treasury Secretary, all the individual regulators, and an independent chair with a staff underneath it that can draw up information from all of the day-to-day regulators, would have actually seen some more of this systemic risk coming down the line beforehand, because its sole job for this chair would be systemic risk. Systemic risk, remember, is, you can't oftentimes, you know it when you see it, it's not a defined entity.
Yeah.
My concern with the Fed is the Fed's major responsibility ought to be monetary policy. It has a bias towards banks. And as we've seen with the AIGs and others, sometimes the systemic risk may arise not within a financial institution. And a council with that independent chair, I think, could see ahead of the time, see above the silos, and I hope act quickly and more expeditiously.
Sonia Sotomayor, you've now had 2 months to look at the record. Everybody has a pretty good sense of what she stood for, where she's been. As of today, are you going to vote for her?
Listen, I think that she is extraordinarily qualified. I intend to vote for her unless I hear other things that would come out of the hearings.
And she'll be confirmed?
I believe she'll be confirmed.
Final political question. I understand you have the highest approval rating of anyone in the state of Virginia, so you must know your people pretty well. Tom Davis, who's a very shrewd Republican, says that this time in the Virginia gubernatorial race, things are different, that the Democrats, the Republicans don't have the burden of George W. Bush. But he also says that Virginia is a counter-cyclical state. Every time for the last 8 elections, the party that holds the White House, the other party wins the governorship. That means, he says, Republicans are the favorite this time.
Well, under that theory, Barack Obama wouldn't have won Virginia last year because Virginia hadn't voted for a Democrat for 44 years.
Right, but when you won the governorship, the Republicans held the White House.
But I think at the end of the day, what Virginians are looking for, and it may just be my state, but they're less Democrat or Republican. They're more about who can actually get stuff done. People want things to get done. Right. They want to get done in a non-partisan or bipartisan way. The Democratic candidate this year has worked across party lines. He's been more of a moderate. The Republican candidate, a good man, somebody I worked with as well. But whenever there came those moments in time over the last 10 or 15 years when we've had to step up and take tough choices, he wasn't there. So I think our candidate, Creed Eads, will be successful in the fall.
You do? Okay. Governor Warner, thank you so much for being with us, and a happy 4th of July to you.
Thank you, Al.